Okay.
Whether it's the whack of the golf club or the crack of the gavel, a look inside the mind of one of Alaska's most powerful political players.
People probably underestimate me, and that's probably the wrong thing to do for them.
But after a record of 8 years on the job, Mike Chenault is ready to pass the gavel. Why Democrats see this as a path to power.
I think a change in the guard is a good thing.
Just ahead on Frontiers, why this week's primary could be a game changer. KTVA's Liz Raines sizes up the key races.
Alaska, where there are old triumphs, but also new frontiers, with challenges as great as the state itself, but a belief the best is yet to come, bringing you the faces, the places, and the spirit of the last frontier. This is Frontiers with Rhonda McBride.
Welcome to our program, where we turn our eye towards next Tuesday's primary and Alaska's favorite sport, politics. Although Representative Mike Chenault's Kenai Peninsula seat is probably safe, he says he's done with his job as House Speaker, and now, after the longest reign as Speaker in state history, it's the end of an era. Whether in politics or just putting around with old friends,
Come on, baby, be the one.
Mike Chenault downplays his skills.
Not any of us are great, but we have good shots every once in a while, and that brings you back for more.
But don't be fooled.
Mike's a good golf player. Mike is much better than average.
And you're going to think, God, this is kind of a Bubba, you know, good old boy, aw shucks.
When Lindsay Holmes was a freshman Democrat, a veteran lawmaker warned her about Chenault's redneck routine.
She said, do not buy it for a minute. That man is smart as a whip. Do not ever underestimate Mike Chenault.
So why do you try to lowball your intelligence?
Maybe it helps in politics, I don't know. Yeah, I think people probably underestimate me, and that's probably the wrong thing to do for them. But you know, I'm not a smart guy.
What's your email address?
I don't want to say.
Isn't it?
No, I
Nikiski
don't want you to say. I don't want you to say on this show, Rhonda.
Okay, but does your email?
My email is Nikiski_redneck.
A redneck who is proud of his large extended family and their roots on the Kenai. The house where Chenault grew up may look big, but the core is just a cabin, with sections added on as the Chenault family construction business grew and prospered. That's quite a watch, though. Chenault still wears his grandfather's gold watch given to him when he retired from the family business. Chenault jokes about asking freshman lawmakers to kiss the watch. The view of the bluff remains the same as it was when Chenault grew up. He's still married to Tana, the young woman who worked in his grandmother's Western clothing shop. Together, they raised 4 kids, which includes an adopted son, Brandon, and a set of twin daughters.
Mike has that street smarts.
A quality the House Minority Leader admires.
I'll call Mike up and go over an issue with him, and he's underneath the car fixing the brakes.
As an electrician and construction worker, Tuck relates to Chenault.
Some of the smartest people I've ever dealt with are people that work with their hands. And Mike happens to be one of those types of guys that works with his hands that's very brilliant.
That building with the 5 stacks on top of it, we built that.
Here at the Agrium fertilizer plant, the Chenault family has a lot of history. Bill and Helen Chenault ran Quick Construction, which did a lot of the maintenance here at Agrium, and as a young man, Chenault supervised a construction crew of more than 300 workers.
Whether that was sheetrocking buildings or whether that was working out at the shop on some welding project or sandblasting or running a loader, dump truck, you name it, I've done it.
Agrium closed when Cook Inlet's supply of natural gas ran dry. Although Chenault pushed for tax credits that helped to revitalize Cook Inlet exploration, the plant remains closed.
In my opinion, it'd be great to bring this facility back.
That could depend on what happens on Exxon land near Nikiski, set aside for the Alaska Liquefied Natural Gas Project.
They bought the land and they're rehabbing it.
Chenault was one of the architects for the legislation that laid the groundwork for AKLNG.
If they ever build the LNG facility on the Kenai, this is where it'll be located at.
For now, the world energy glut threatens to tank the project, but Chenault believes the state should stay the course with AKLNG.
This project's a good project. I think it has great benefits, potential for the state of Alaska, but it has to be at the right time on the right terms.
It's been a year of discord between special sessions and battles over the state's budget crisis, but Chenault remains philosophical.
Probably the hardest lesson I had to learn as a politician is you don't always get what you want. And that's really a lesson in life.
If you could give advice to yourself when you first started out, what advice would you give to the young Mike Chenault?
Be patient.
I don't know how he's done it for 8 years.
Lindsay Holmes had a chance to work with Chenault in both the minority and the majority. She switched parties partly because of Chenault's leadership.
There are speakers who come in and lay down the law and they rule with an iron fist. And there are some who rule by being devious. And Mike doesn't do either of those. Mike is he's a very patient guy and he's a straight shooter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
There are others eyeing the Speaker's job, including Democrats like Chris Tuck.
I think a change in the guard is a good thing because it keeps people accountable.
So what's his biggest weakness?
Probably being Speaker for so long, a complacency that may have set in a little bit.
Come on, partner.
Whether in golf or politics, Chenault is good at the numbers.
Ooh, you guys are +1 right now.
Enough to know the odds are good the Democrats may be able to flip enough seats to change the game. But whatever happens,
Oh, what a player.
Chenault will always be a player.
Let me go hit.
Chenault described this past session as a disastrous quadruple bogey. Well, still to come, a look at the circumstances that led to one of the most contentious sessions in recent memory. And KTVA's political reporter Liz Raines has the playbook for next Tuesday's primary, the races that have everybody guessing. They say the House Speaker's job is like herding cats and turtles. Then add a $4 billion deficit, and you have a recipe for trouble.
The governor and the House Speaker made an attempt to work things out with a friendly game of bowling.
I'm glad that they're comfortable with me being part of this.
But the end result, more gutter balls and missed opportunities.
Oh!
House, please come back to order.
And after extended overtime in Juneau, the House failed to fix the state's fiscal crisis.
It's a slow process. It's a tedious process.
Majority Leader said the governor didn't do his job to rally support for his revenue measures.
It's also going to take a governor that wants this legislation to pass and is willing to work for it.
Those that say we haven't done enough, I'm pushing back on that. I'm very offended by that.
One of the ironies, the House Speaker actually supported some of Walker's tax and permanent fund proposals.
If you could write a book of advice for governors, what would you say?
Include the legislature in the actions that you are going to propose. We're not informed on what's going on until I read a press release. And to me, that's just not the way to do business.
Chenault also says the governor put too many taxes on the table.
Once you put out 9 or 11 revenue measures, there was something there that everybody could clamor around and say, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to do this until you do this.
But if you could wave a magic wand, kind of be general manager of the universe, what would you do?
You know, and right now, I don't have an answer to that. You know, I'm not the governor, and 2, I don't have a magic wand. And, you know, if I could wave a magic wand, it'd probably be to get the price of a barrel of oil to come up. And 2, to continue drilling to bring our production level up. That in itself is the biggest way to fill the budget gap that the state of Alaska has.
As the capital undergoes major reconstruction, some say it coincides with a change in the political structure of the state. That come next January, a bipartisan coalition could be in charge of the House and break the gridlock, which Mike Chenault failed to do. Some people might say that he's ending his career on a sour note of failure.
Well, I wouldn't say that at all.
John Harris was the last speaker to serve before Chenault. He describes the job as babysitting, even under normal circumstances.
This was a tough year, and I disagree with anybody who says he's going out on a bad or sour note, because nobody is going to have an easy task of bringing this group of people together under these circumstances with these issues. Sometimes that's what you do as a speaker. You get the best deal you can get, and sometimes you can't get a deal. Sometimes you just cannot get a deal.
Harris gives Chenault kudos for being an effective leader.
One of the traits that he has is that he's able to get people to follow him, which isn't easy, especially amongst Republicans.
Republicans, though in the majority, can be incredibly independent critters.
What would you like your legacy to be as a speaker?
You know, I think just as a speaker that I was fair, that I tried to listen to everyone's input and tried to make my decisions based on that.
Well, you burn the candle pretty hard at both ends, because I've seen you come into the building very early, leave very late.
I play hard, I work hard, and I play hard. And, you know, I enjoy my time on this earth so far, and don't know when it's going to end, but whenever it does, it just does. We're adjourned.
Chenault says that he hasn't completely ruled out the speaker's job. It all depends on the outcome of the elections and the players involved. Well, some of those races will be decided on this Tuesday because the winner won't face any challengers in the general election. And our political reporter, Liz Raines, is here to help us make sense of it all. Now, Liz, the primaries are normally kind of sleepers. You know, you're really waiting for the general. What's it like this year?
Well, that's the case this year, and because there aren't any propositions on the ballot, it's actually even slower than usual. But this is an exciting time in several communities around the state. There are 8 seats in which the winner will likely take all. That's the case in the Mat-Su. We've got Republicans Jim Culver and George Rosher facing off. There is no Democrat, just Pamela Good with the Alaska Constitution Party in the general. And that's also the case with fellow Republicans Richard Best and Palmer's city mayors Delana Johnson. They're just going to face a non-affiliated candidate, Burt Verrall, in the general election. And in Eagle River, it's going to be winner takes all for incumbent Dan Sadler, who's facing off with fellow Republican Miranda Walso. And also in that area, we've got Republican Laura Reinbold, who is going to be facing off with Crystal Kennedy. That's going to be a close race to watch, very contested seat, and whoever wins that will face just a non-affiliated candidate, Joe Hackenmuller, in the general. And then here in Anchorage, in Homer, we've got Paul Seaton. He's going to be facing off with other Republicans, John Cox and Beth Wythe. There is no Democrat running in that race. And we've also got in rural Alaska, Bob Herron and Zach Fansler are going to be facing off, both Democrats. Ben Nagiak and Dean Westlake, also both Democrats. Winner is going to be taking all in those cases. And on the Senate side, a couple of interesting races to watch. Republicans Lynn Gaddis and David Wilson are going to be facing off. And here in Anchorage, we've got 2 Democrats, Tom Begich and Ed Wesley, who will be vying for a seat on Tuesday.
Well, we'll get your full report on Tuesday. Can't wait to see what happens. And of course, on the web, you've got your reports on the hot seats. Good series, Liz.
Thank you. Yep, we've got that hot seat series and an interactive map so you can check out who's running where.
All right, thanks, Liz. Well, still to come, we've got the backstory on this year's election from the Bradner brothers. Mike and Tim have read the political tea leaves for many years, and we'll get their take on what to expect next Tuesday. I would like to start off with a quote from Clive Thomas, an Alaska historian. Politics is not about the state constitution, the size of the legislature, or any government function. It is about the human element, the people in politics and their personalities. And two men who know this well join us now, Michael and Tim Bradner, the Bradner brothers, who make a living writing about Alaska politics. And Mike has done more than just write. You've also been a House Speaker. So you have a good sense of whether or not Mike Chenault has done a good job. What's your take?
Well, I think he's done a good job. I mean, I think he has served at a very difficult time when politics has become very polarized, and you had to work within your caucus. And I think the last session was probably very difficult. I think with redistricting, you had, what, 6 people now out of the valley, and they have some tough constituencies up there to deal with.
They're kind of a block to be reckoned with, so to speak. But, you know, you dealt with, what was it, Governor Egan?
Yes.
And so what was the dynamic?
Well, Egan was very good to work with. I mean, you talked about things in his office, and he liked to talk about the real problem. And sometimes you'd almost get a little upset because he'd get 2 cigarettes going at once, and you'd have to clarify when you left the office, because Egan, he wasn't afraid of offending somebody politically in his office. He was a detail guy. And he also had great communication with the legislature.
Well, you get the sense from Mike Chenault that he thinks that the governor is not doing a good enough job of wrangling the votes.
Well, I don't know. I think the situation we're in is very unusual. And I think the governor has to provide some leadership. And I think he put a lot on the table. He said the awful words. Taxes and utilize part of the permanent fund. And I think the legislature has to do the same thing, but it's not just one legislature, it's 2. It's a House and a Senate. And you have the feeling sometimes this session we had a faction between the House and the Senate, and the Senate tended to wait to the last minute and just dump things on the House. And they maintained a good face on it, but I think that was, the end was, there wasn't anything they could do but adjourn.
So let's talk about this upcoming primary Tuesday. You know, the Democrats are really hoping that they may gain enough seats to sort of cobble together a coalition with the Republicans and be part of the majority. You think, Tim, that we're going to see whether or not that could happen starting in the primary?
Well, I've heard people who know more than I about these things say that this is a year that Democrats could make gains and they could come within range of doing a coalition, either in the House or in the Senate. And I think there's a number of key races to watch. There were also factions within the House in the last session which will have a direct bearing on this. There was a dissident faction that developed called the Muskox Caucus, led by Representative Paul Seaton and Homer.
And he's being targeted.
Yes, he's being targeted, and some of the 2 of the rural Democrats who stuck with the House majority are being targeted. So there's several different groups, a lot of cross factions going on here. People targeting each other. Jim Culver from Palmer joined the dissident faction, the Muskox, supported Seaton. He's a target.
He's got Republicans, you know, usually you have the party supporting the incumbent, but they've more or less said they want him to go.
In this case, Republicans are targeting Culver and Seaton, and on the other side of it, you have factions that are aligned with the Democrats, including Anchorage attorney Robin Brenna raising money, and Anchorage businessman Ron Duncan is weighing into this, also raising money to be a factor in the race. And they're targeting 2 rural Democrats who, Ben Nagiak of Barrow and Bob Heron of Bethel, who stuck with the traditional House Republican majority. And their challengers are people who would possibly go with a coalition. So you can see kind of the chemistry and the strategies behind that.
So what do you think about this sort of jockeying? We haven't seen this in a while, because, at least in the House, because they've had a pretty solid majority.
That's right. And now it's closer, and they have to get up to a fairly even split before this is going to work. And there has to be a genuine sort of coalition. You can't be just trying to wall out the other side. If you can do it, you'd like to be much more inclusive and sort of open up the whole process, that everybody is a part of it. That only happens occasionally, and it'll work, I mean, where you let everybody have their voice. But I think you've got to get up to that, you know, where maybe Democrats got to get a seat or two, and then when they reach across, they have to have enough ego control that as you invite Republicans in, you give them some senior leadership.
Ego control. That's the key word. Well, speaking of egos, you know, we've seen a lot of Donald Trump on television this election cycle. Do you think his candidacy will have an impact on turnout here in Alaska?
Well, I've heard that it could actually affect a couple of key races in sort of an odd way. This is a completely wild card factor nobody ever thought would happen. We have cases where there are conservative Republicans who are dislike Mr. Trump for different reasons. They're not happy with Hillary Clinton. They could just not vote.
So turnout is going to be really key.
Yes, and I think you could very well see that in the Hillside district, which is, of course, these will be factors in November, in the general election. You'll see that in Fairbanks, possibly, again, in the November election. But things like that could very well play into this and have a factor.
So
I think
we're really seeing the stage set in this primary.
I think so, yeah. But it could be more important in the general.
And also, some of those districts, the district that Senator Coghill and former Mayor Luke Hopkins are running in Fairbanks, Coghill hasn't actually run in most of that district. And half of it is a Democratic district.
So he's going to have a tough row to hoe come November.
It's a possibility. It's a competitive race. And the Hillside race is also sort of interesting because in those districts, Forrest Dunbar actually carried a lot of it. So did Walker. And
in the last election.
Yeah, in the last election. So, you know, we make an assumption. We look at the Hillside and
say, oh, it's all Republican.
And that's not necessarily the case. But it'll be, and of course, that's Senate races. In the House, they've got to find some races to win somewhere in Anchorage, and there's not many to pick from.
It's going to be an exciting election, both the primary and the general. Well, I want to thank both of you for joining us and being a part of this political conversation, which we will continue on the web. And we're also going to be reaching out to you on Facebook. So get your questions ready on Monday morning at 9. Join me for a live discussion on Facebook. We've asked political insiders Larry Persily and Christopher Clark for their help to answer your questions. So send them to web@ktva.com and join us on the KTVA Facebook page on Monday, August 15th, 9 a.m., the place to be for all of you fans of Alaska's favorite sport. Or we'll convert you one way or another. But Alaskans, you know, are also passionate about other things, like berry picking. We're going to leave you with some photographs to prove our point. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week, and don't forget to vote.